Let me introduce the first keynote speaker. It's Mr. Edward Watson. He is the Vice President for Digital Innovation at the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and he's also the Founding Director of Institute on AI, Pedagogy, and the Curriculum. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Buenos dias, everyone. That's pretty good. We'll go with that. Yeah, I'm Eddie Watson. I'm from, we call ourselves AAC&U, the American Association of Colleges and Universities. And before that, I was at the University of Georgia and at Virginia Tech before that. So I had a 20-year career in higher education before moving to sort of faculty development at scale across the United States and really internationally. AAC&U, we have a significant number of members that are indeed international institutions. But really over the last maybe 3 years, my focus has pivoted toward the challenges and opportunities associated with AI. I had a book come out a couple of years ago called Teaching with AI that really kind of chronicled how higher education and really individual faculty can respond to the challenges associated with AI. I'm often asked, how did you write a book so fast? Did you use AI to write the book? And no, we did not. But I think like many of you, I have people in my life that bring me the latest and greatest things. Maybe you have a teaching center on campus that brings things to you, or maybe you have students that are always excited to share things with you. For me, I get most of my latest, greatest ideas from my youngest son, Carter. As a good example of this, he wanted me to go to the Apple store and try out the Apple Vision Pro goggles. When he comes to me with ideas, he's always really excited. He says things like, "Dad, this is going to change your life." It almost never changes my life. And this was a really good example of that, where I went to the Apple store, I tried out the Apple Vision Pro goggles. They're like 87 pounds on my head. I've got to type in the air in front of me. Get some new form of carpal tunnel if I really adopted that. So I just couldn't see myself going down that road. But Carter came home from college in November of 2022, and I remember him opening the door and dropping his laundry and saying hello to everyone, and then he pointed at me and he said, "Dad, have you seen ChatGPT yet?" And I said, I've heard of it. I haven't tried it yet. And he says, "Oh, Dad, this is going to change your life." I kind of rolled my eyes, but we went into the kitchen. He opened up his laptop, and then he said, "So, Dad, what do you ask your students?" I said, "What do I ask my students?" I said, "Do you mean like an assignment?" And he said, "Yeah, like what's your favorite assignment for your students?" And I gotta say, I started really liking this conversation with my son Carter. He's taking an interest in my work, so I'm more than happy to talk about some of my assignments. So I started describing one that I had repurposed for multiple courses, and he's typing away inside of a browser window. And after I finished sort of describing the assignment, he turned the laptop toward me and he says, does this pretty much capture your assignment? And I said, "Yeah, that's pretty much it." And then he hit return. And now it's captured in family lore that the next words out of my mouth, as I saw the response to my assignment scrolling up on the screen, the next words out of my mouth were, "Oh no." Because I instantly saw the academic integrity challenges that was going to bring forward for higher education, but then it also made my assignment and possibly me feel obsolete. Like, oh gosh, there's work that's going to be required to respond to this that's going to have some negative impacts on myself. So yeah, we have a new edition of the book coming out. It's going to start shipping in just about a week, but the second edition, which is fully updated with the current state of everything associated with AI. But I do believe Carter was right, that it is changing our lives. And I think there's a lot of specific ways that AI is changing our lives. I think it's not just changing the world of work, which I want to talk about sort of like the macro to begin here, like sort of what is the larger scale of things that we're seeing in terms of AI. But I would go further to say that as more and more of us adopt AI or start using AI, or AI is brought forward to us, like, Google searches now return AI results at the top in most contexts. So whether we want to or not, we're now having AI foisted on us. But I think it's going to change the way that we think, the way that we problem solve, the way that we decide what tasks we continue to do ourselves versus which tasks we might ask AI to do. I think AI is also changing the very definition of the word average, and I mean that within the context of our courses and our course syllabi. Like if an assignment that we used to give our students, we knew what a C looked like, but in context where we might allow our students to use AI, or we might even encourage them to use AI, is a C still a C if AI can produce average work? Maybe the old C is the new F, the new failing grade. Then what does excellence look like in our courses whenever we are asking students to collaborate with AI? I think we're also seeing that AI is changing creativity. And so these are some threads I want to talk about briefly. But I mean, first, thinking about the world of work, like where are we seeing AI kind of make inroads? Well, a good example of this, there's a few examples from the world of medicine, but one is, probably many of us in this room have had the misfortune of having some part of our body scanned, a CT scan or an ultrasound. And the process used to look like this. You would go and there would be a technician that would do the scan, and then you would have someone else that would actually read the scan, and then you would talk with your doctor. So there would be 3 humans in that process. Well, now in many clinical settings, AI is interjected in multiple places. For one, after the scan, AI is now being used, again in many settings, to clear up the quality of the scan, to make the scan more palatable to human eyes. So there's one improvement. Also, AI will do a scan, a read of the scan, and then provide recommendations to the human that's doing the scan. So it'll certainly say, read the entire scan, but it'll say pay special attention to what's inside of this red box or where these yellow arrows are pointing. And as a result of this human AI collaboration, in these settings, we're now detecting 20% more cancers than we did in the past. And of course, many of these cancers are at the very early stages, which is when you really would want to catch cancer. You always want to catch cancer, but certainly at the early stages so that it's more treatable. So this is one example of where AI becoming a part of our sort of collaborative fabric in this world to solve problems is probably a good place. Another example of this is I've had a really interesting experience with my primary care physician, so my family doctor. Usually whenever I would go see him, the process would look like this. I'd be called back to the back room, and then I would wait and wait and wait for him to come in, but then he would roll in with a little cart with a laptop on it. And he'd come in, and then he would talk very earnestly to me. Our kids were in school together. I was on soccer sidelines with him. I'd known him for 20 years. But he would come in, and he would talk to me very earnestly for about 42 seconds. He would say, "Hey, Eddie, how are the kids? How are Liam? How are Carter?" And then he'd say, "So what brought you in today?" And then he would turn to his laptop, and he'd start typing. So most of the time, I would just talk, and he would be taking notes on the computer. That was my relationship with my family doctor. But earlier this fall, I go to see him, sort of the same thing. He rolls in with the cart, with the laptop. "How are the kids? What brought you in today?" And he opens up his laptop, and he does a couple of keystrokes, and then he leans back, kind of crosses his legs, and, "What brought you in today?" And he starts listening to me. So after about 3 minutes of eye contact with my doctor for the first time in 10 years, I waved my hands in front of my face and said, "Wait a second, something's different here." And he said, "Well, actually, I'm using a generative AI tool right now. It's listening to our conversation." I wish he told me it was listening to our conversation. That was like the first thing that came to my mind. I thought, what did I say for the last 3 minutes? But he says it's taking notes, it's filling in insurance codes, and he says, to be honest, I know where it's going to make errors or which insurance codes are going to get kicked back. He said, so after we chat, we'll read over the notes together, I'll make some edits, and then we'll enter it into your record. But I was thinking on the ride home that, wow, what a different experience that was, and also thinking about all of the nonverbal communication that doctors have missed for years as they have shifted their work toward note-taking so much, and how valuable it will be for doctors to see us whenever we express concern or discomfort on our faces where they may have missed this in the past. So this seems like an improvement as well within healthcare, and certainly generative AI is finding places well beyond just the world of healthcare. There's a tool called CoCounsel that is being adopted by law firms. It's like about $400 a month to adopt this tool. Its tagline is so that you can do more of what AI can't. So it kind of makes you think, well, what is it AI can't do? What is it that humans can't do? And why would you want to bring this in? Well, this tool It reviews contracts. So you might get a 100-page contract from a foundation that's giving money to your university, and so you've got this contract. AI could review it and make recommendations. If you've used track changes in Microsoft Word or another tool like that, the output looks similar to that. I was talking to a friend of mine that's a senior vice president at Rutgers University, and he oversees a number of different things, but the legal department is one of them. And he said that he's adopted co-counsel, he says, because he's known some things about his lawyers for quite a while. He knows that his lawyers are really good at catching things that are wrong in contracts, but they aren't necessarily that good at catching things that are missing. And he said co-counsel is good at both of those things. So he's requiring his lawyers, especially his junior lawyers, those new lawyers that they've hired, to use co-counsel in contract review. And I said, so how is this changing things? And he says, well, reviewing a contract might take the better part of a day in the old model, but collaborating with co-counsel, that might just take 90 minutes to 2 hours. I said, well, so what does this mean? He says, well, I've really kind of changed our lawyers into spending less time sort of in legalese and actually becoming process facilitators. So we get a contract from a foundation, we review it with co-counsel, we make our edits, and then we send it back to them. And he said, so what I have my junior lawyers do is then follow up via the phone. Call them up and say, hey, I sent you back the contract. I know you probably haven't had a time to look at it, but do you want to schedule a time to chat later this afternoon? And he said, as a result, they've cut the time to contracting down by a couple of weeks by adding in this element of sort of like human connection and conversation and managing the larger process rather than just sending things back via email. In fact, Rutgers is now marketing itself. If you need a research university as a partner, we can get from idea inception to contract faster than anyone. And he said that he really looks at co-counsel as being the reason for that. So with that said, there's concerns that come to mind. Like if you don't have junior level lawyers doing junior level work for the better part of a decade, how do we get senior level lawyers? So I think we're likely going to see some interesting workforce education challenges emerge as more businesses and industries begin adopting AI and allow AI to do that part of the work process that before used to give every use case under the sun that would enable someone in that field to matriculate further and further along their career line. So there's some interesting educational challenges that are going to result from this. Of course, it's not just medicine and law. I think probably many of us in this room, I'll say it again, have had the misfortune of calling a customer service line. I'm not a fan of calling customer service lines. I've discovered that if I press 0 like 7 to 9 times, I can get to a real person. So that's something that's a strategy that's been helpful in life. I probably shouldn't use the name of a real company as I give my example here. I'll just make up the name of a company that I don't necessarily like calling that much. I'll just call it American Airlines. So if I call American Airlines, and I go through that tree and then I get the person online, well, there's now been a shift in how customer service is working. You may have called in the past and heard like a qualifying statement before you get to a person. This call may be monitored for quality assurance. Well, often now you hear this call is being monitored, and the monitor is often AI. So how AI functions in this context is the customer service representative has someone whispering in their ear, essentially, and it's AI. And the AI will say things like this, that's listening to the conversation. It'll say things like, this customer sounds upset. Try to de-escalate. Talk more slowly. Or we'll say things like, you haven't answered the customer's question yet. Look on the screen. The highlighted paragraph is the answer that they're looking for. And as a result of this collaboration, this just-in-time support for the customer service representative, customer sentiment's improving. They're solving more cases per hour. There are fewer requests from the clients calling in, so all of us, let me talk to your manager kind of thing. There's fewer of those requests. But I find it maybe most interesting is that employee retention is improving. And I was talking to a colleague who used to work in a call center 15 years ago. And I said, so how did you resolve issues? And he was like, oh, wow, this was not a fun job. You know, when people call a customer service line, it's because they're upset about something. They're not calling to wish you, you know, a happy birthday or whatever. So he said, you know, it was very kind of contentious work. And I said, well, how did you get support? And he says, well, on the last day of the week, on Friday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, the shift boss would call us in and say, hey, did anyone have any challenging cases this week? And so he said, you know, he could describe something that happened on Tuesday, but, you know, it would have been much more helpful to get feedback or assistance on Tuesday when it happened rather than on Friday. And I think the fact that, indeed, customer service representatives are receiving just-in-time support when they're having those challenging situations is probably making their work lives a little bit better. So I guess I'm hopeful that, and believe me, I have some very dystopian views around AI, and if you come to my interactive workshop in the next session, you'll hear a lot of those. But I think that we're going to see some very positives and some very negatives come out of AI's emergence within sort of the landscape of humanity. But I do believe there are opportunities that AI is going to make us happier. And just as an example of this, within a higher education context, I mean, there are things, I bet if you think about your job, think about your last couple of weeks, there are things that you love to do that you would never ask AI to do, because why would you outsource something that you enjoy doing yourself? But I bet there's also some tasks that are somewhat tedious. And maybe you could leverage AI to help with those tedious tasks that then would free up time to do the things that you love. So as an example of this, in my last semester at the University of Georgia, between late February and April, I received 48 requests from students for letters of recommendation for jobs or for graduate school. I really value that work, writing those letters, but you know, it takes me about an hour to do each one of those, and certainly I had found shortcuts, right? Like I would ask students to send me their resume and their cover letter and the job description, and then I would also ask, what would be 3 things you would like for me to highlight in this letter? Like, what are 3 strengths that you want me to be sure that in my letter, in the context of your larger application packet, I should be sure to highlight? And of course, I've had some students ask for some crazy things. I had one student ask me, could you say I'm the greatest student of my generation? Like, I could say that. I'm not likely to say that. But, you know, so that's just it. I make choices about what I would put in the letter and what I wouldn't put in that letter. But now I can ask for that same packet of information from a student, and then ask AI to create a draft letter for that company, for this student, for that job, highlighting these 3 strengths. I then, of course, read every word. I adjust for tone and voice. And to be honest, I feel like the most valuable thing I've ever written in a letter of recommendation is the personal story. You know, like, I remember when Carla was in my class, and she led this contentious group of students to complete this project at great quality. You know, that letter, that's something that AI couldn't produce, that personalized story. So I'd still write that, but I have this draft that I'm working from, and instead of maybe that task of writing the letter taking a full hour, maybe it takes more like 15 minutes. So in the month of March, if I'm able to save, let's say 35 hours, how might I reinvest that time into my students or into my teaching or my research or maybe into me? Maybe I'll go for a run in the afternoon rather than hoping to get one after dinner because I'm so busy, you know, sitting in front of the computer. So I do feel that there are some real opportunities for us going forward. But let's look more broadly at the world of work right now. I mean, there's a lot of questioning about whether or not AI is going to take a lot of jobs. I think we do have some evidence that suggests what's likely to happen. I mean, one thing, there was a group of researchers at Stanford University that reviewed all of the job descriptions and all of the tasks associated with those job descriptions in what's called the Federal Job Index. So for all jobs within the United States federal government, there's something called the Federal Job Index that has all of those job descriptions. And this group of researchers concluded that AI could do at least one task in every job within the federal government better or with greater efficiency today, like the way that AI functions currently. That doesn't mean all of those jobs are going away, but it does tend to suggest that most of us going forward in our careers, and certainly our students as they get out beyond higher education, are going to encounter AI and may even have the expectation that they have to have AI skills to be able to do certain kinds of work. Again, there has been a lot of questioning about job loss, and actually we've seen some soft hiring since really 2025 began, and like those that graduated from college in the summer across many nations have found it more difficult to find jobs, so there's greater unemployment among those that just graduated from college. And there are some specific majors that do seem to be more at risk given the scope of what AI can produce. I mean, AI is good at producing text and producing computer code, so we've seen a decline in many contexts around hiring those in architecture and engineering design. Those are those that are the most affected. Of course, there have been some headlines that have said, well, it's because of AI. That's why we're seeing all of this job loss. But in truth, there's been a lot of disrupting factors within the world economy, especially in 2025, and many of those you highlighted to begin our time together today. So actually, some employers are saying they're not filling positions because AI is taking those jobs, but rather this is a time of uncertainty, and they're not sure if AI is a solution. They're also not sure how changes in sort of some federal, national economic strategies might be impacting their business. So many are taking a wait and see. Not that they're not going to hire, not that AI is replacing, but let's see if AI really does have an impact here, rather than hiring someone and then realizing in 6 months maybe this wasn't the best hire. This is a moment where many are saying that they're taking a wait and see. But definitely, those in the world of work are thinking about AI as a solution. I mean, they're often thinking about bottom line and how they can save money, and certainly salary is one place where a lot of companies have a majority of their expenditures. But there was a survey about 2 years ago, large-scale employer survey, international survey by Amazon Web Services. And at that time, 2 years ago, 19 out of 20 employers said if they weren't already using AI within their work processes, that they saw that they were going to build that in. They had sort of like this timeline of over the next 5 years in the study. But that is what they were seeing, what they were projecting. Also within this study, at that time, 2 years ago, employers noted that they were having a really hard time finding those that had AI skills that could be leveraged within their place of work. And then when asked specifically, how can we meet that need? So globally, what is the solution to this skills gap that's being perceived? And the majority of employers pointed to us. So this is logically within societies across the globe, this is the logical place where this skills gap would be resolved. Higher education will solve this. And I think one reason why I was really glad to see that is there are a number of micro-credentials, a number of certificate programs out there online, like LinkedIn and Microsoft have such things, that specifically target AI literacy as a solution. So even though these things are on the landscape, easy online options, employers still say higher education is the best place where this can be solved. So they're looking to us to solve this greater challenge. Though a more recent survey just this past year, it's a Microsoft survey, so take it with a grain of salt, of course, but Microsoft's employer survey found that 2/3 of leaders said they wouldn't hire someone if they didn't already have some level of AI skills. Now, that doesn't mean that AI is supplanting the degree or the major, or those durable skills that employers really shifted to looking for maybe 15 to 20 years ago. So yes, you want someone, if you're going to hire an accountant, you need someone with an accounting degree or accounting training. Ideally, they would also have durable skills such as being able to think critically and write well. But now there's this third silo that's AI skills. And so some are saying, if you don't have that sort of collection of skills, you may not be hireable going forward. Of course, that's the perspective of employers. What are we seeing from employees? Well, we've seen a real jump in employees reporting how they are using AI within the world of work. The Wharton School of Business did a very well done survey on 2023 and 2024. I'm expecting the 2025 results really just about any week now at the end of the year, because that's when these last 2 years of survey results came out. But 2 years ago, about 1 in 3 employees reported using AI within the world of work. Then 1 year later, it went from 1 in 3 to about 7 in 10. Over 70% of employees were reporting that they were using AI. And so in the next survey, would we expect the results to be maybe it's closer to 4 out of 5 or maybe even higher? Most likely so. But there was a survey last year of recent college graduates who just got their first job after college. And they asked them about sort of like their world of work, but there was a subset of questions around AI. And at that time, more than half said, wow, college didn't prepare me to use AI within the world of work. And in fact, 7 in 10 expressed frustration. They were like, why didn't my college teach me this? This should have been integrated within the curriculum since I'm now seeing this in the world of work. In fact, a survey from just this past summer of current college students, more than half said that AI was the most important skill that they were going to learn while in college. I tend to disagree. I think AI is an important skill that they should learn in college, but there's an array of other things, such as being a critical thinker, that would be more important. Employers have also been asked, well, this notion of AI literacy, what do you need to know to be able to use AI well? And I was really kind of thrilled to see this list of things that employers think their employees need to possess to use AI well. Critical thinking was number 1 on that list. Creative thinking was high on the list. Some technical skills obviously was on the list. Also, ethics was high on that list. But these are the skills. When you look at your curriculum within your major, or if you have a general education program, I bet this list, probably a subset of this list, are things that you overtly teach within your programs. Indeed, higher ed is well positioned to address this larger challenge. But as we drill down a little bit further regarding this notion of AI literacy as a learning outcome for higher education, what does that really look like? Like what is the specific discrete skills that we might teach, like subdimensions of AI literacy? And for me, I kind of see it like a tennis match. There are things that ideally students would possess before they ever use AI in the first place, before they ever hit their first prompt across the net to AI. And so among those skills would be, number 1, having a mindset or a disposition, a belief, an understanding that AI doesn't do the work for you, but rather AI does the work with you, but you're the executive decision maker and you have to provide significant oversight and review of everything that AI might produce for you before you move that forward in any professional context, including our classroom settings. So engendering that mindset is an important outcome for higher education for our students. Also, teaching some specific discrete skills, like, when would you use one tool over another, and they all have strengths and weaknesses, and so how do you get around some of the weaknesses of these tools? And then there's an array of ethical concerns regarding using AI, and then there's also the notion of using AI, like might it just be a bad idea to use AI for a specific context? So as an example of this, you go to the doctor and you have an ultrasound and you get back the results, via an online system. In the States, we have something called MyChart. But you get back those results. Is it a good idea to copy and paste those results into an AI and say, give me a layman's understanding of these medical results? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? I heard 2 bads. I can see downsides to posting personal information about oneself into an AI that's also has a lot of other information about you. So definitely concerns, but also getting a quick answer, depending on what the nature of the scan might be, helpful. Though it might be helpful just to wait till Monday and talk to your doctor rather than putting it in an AI as well. But helping students understand the things that they need to think through. Then there's also this notion of prompt engineering, right? How do you ask good questions of AI to get good quality output? And then once they have these skills and begin using AI, it's a completely different skill set. There's this notion of you have the output from AI, being able to review and evaluate, number 1, for accuracy and concerns about bias. I mean, to be honest, AI is actually a pretty helpful tool for everyone in this room because we're all experts within our domain. So we ask a question of AI within our field, and we can tell pretty instantly, we have tacit knowledge that could help us go, this sounds suspicious. I don't believe this. I need to look up something else. Our students don't have tacit knowledge within their domain. It's a horrible tool for our students to be using because AI brings back things with such an air of confidence. So that's why the work within the major, things that students are learning within our educational systems, is maybe more important than ever because they're going to be presented with information that they have to evaluate really almost in a constant fashion, whether it's something that they overtly go to or whether it's something that they find on social media that may have been influenced by AI as well. So a key concept there. What we're seeing in the States is that a number of writing programs are actually changing their curriculum, taking a couple of weeks and not just be teaching writing, but actually teaching editorial skills. Like, what does editing look like in the current era? So those are among the new skills. Understanding how to refine the results using iterative prompting strategies is really important. And whenever I speak with students, I often share that, hey, if you don't see your fingerprints on everything that you put forward, either in a class or in a professional context, if you don't see your intellectual ideas on every line of code or every sentence, then you're probably not using AI appropriately. So I guess ultimately where I've landed is that we have a new tension in educational systems globally. Between this expectation that while the world of work is demanding or seeking these skills, and there's an expectation that's being placed upon higher ed that we would then respond to that. So that argument would that line of logic would lead us to this notion that, yes, we should be teaching this. I mean, I think we would all agree that at least part of the purpose of higher education is to prepare students for life beyond graduation, which indeed includes the world of work. So yes, this line of logic would suggest this needs to be in our curriculum. Not that everyone should be teaching or using AI within our higher education institutions, but someone should. But that's one line of logic. There's other line of logics that begin with my initial story, sort of like the oh no story. Like, why would we want to teach our students to be power users of a tool that they could use to cheat with, to have academic integrity challenges? There's another line of logic that would also suggest this is something we want to keep out of our classrooms. So let's say that I'm a student in your class, and you provide me with a writing assignment. I go to an AI with your prompt, and I say, AI, provide me with a detailed outline regarding how I should respond to this writing prompt. I write every word from that detailed outline. First off, is that cheating? But then second, is it likely to diminish learning? Almost certainly. Every assessment we give our students is an act of pedagogy. Whenever we ask our students to work together or to write or do a presentation, these are all opportunities where we can certainly assess their learning, but we also ensure that they're learning. There's learning that takes place when students write. So if a student gets a detailed outline and writes a paper and just goes from that detailed outline responding to sort of these micro writing prompts, they're not deciding what goes in the paper, what shouldn't be in the paper, what goes first, what goes second, not really even thinking about what the argument might be, just sort of responding to that outline. So again, this might lead us to this notion that we need to keep AI out of the classroom. So I believe this is the grand challenge for higher education globally today, is discerning when it's appropriate to bring AI into the classroom to prepare our students for life beyond graduation, but also discerning where we might not want to have AI present at all because it could be disruptive to the learning process. Indeed, I think this is maybe the first time in higher education that we have a learning outcome, indeed maybe an essential learning outcome for higher education, where it's at war with some of our other learning outcomes. Like, I don't think we would ever have said, well, we can't teach our students writing in this class, it's going to mess up their critical thinking. They kind of magnify each other. But actually teaching AI literacy without a very thoughtful, careful approach can indeed disrupt the achievement of other learning outcomes. So thank you for your time. I'll be going into some specific strategies during my interactive workshop, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good job. May I tell you a personal story? Can I tell you how I feel? I'm always a little bit reluctant to talk after an American speaker, and I need a little bit more of energy because I say, am I speaking English? You did so well, so fast. I mean, okay. Anyhow, I'm from Spain. So next is Amy Smith. She's the founding director of the MIT D Lab and senior lecturer in mechanical engineering at the MIT. She served in the US Peace Corps in Botswana and has done fieldwork in many other countries. She also founded the Ideas Competition, the International Development Design Summit, and the International Development Innovation Network. Ram, the floor is yours. You have the pointer.
I have it. Thank you. Well, buenos dias and good morning. And I welcome everyone to ICERI2025, and I hope that you're all very excited to be here. I know that I am. I was able to be here a few years ago on your side of this, and now I'm pleased to be able to be up here sharing some thoughts on human-centered design, problem solving, and AI. So the title of my talk is Human-Centered Design Becoming Less Human? And I feel like this is an interesting topic, and the impetus for this talk came from when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine from the School of Information at the University of Michigan. And he told me about how they were creating large language models to create these AI bots that could be used in design. Okay, and he sent me to a paper which was talking about this, and they said, with quickly increasing human likeness of large language models, many researchers and investigators are investigating their use for simulating human research subjects. And I have to admit, this kind of terrified me when I read this, but I thought it would be really interesting to explore that, and hence this morning's talk. So by way of a little bit of background, my name is Amy Smith, and as I was introduced, my background is in mechanical engineering and design. Most of my work is in sub-Saharan Africa. However, I realize most of you do not work in sub-Saharan Africa. However, that's where most of my examples come from. But I think that the principles and there can be generalizations that can be made from that work, and also the principles around design can be applied to problem solving in general. So even though you may not be designers who work in sub-Saharan Africa, I hope that you'll find some kernels of this talk that are relevant to the work that you do. Okay, so first of all, when we think about the idea of simulating human subjects, well, what does that mean in the context of design or human-centered design? And I thought, first of all, it might be useful to give a little bit of background on what do we mean by human-centered design. How many of you have done human-centered design, have practiced human-centered design? If you can raise your hand. Okay, I don't see a lot of hands. That's good. I'll explain. And how many of you have heard of human-centered design? Okay. Yeah, it became very popular over the last few decades. And the idea of human-centered design is that you put the human experience at the center of the solution that you're creating. For many years, design put the technical specifications at the center of design, but with human-centered design, the focus is really with the interactions that the user has with the technology or the solution. And so you could see this diagram showing that, that many different groups of people may have input to the final design. And in the context of human-centered design, a lot of times as you go through this process of getting the input from those humans that you would use to as the central part of your design, is people create something that they call personas. And that's where you gather information from people, and then you create these compilations that serve as a way of being able to imagine how these different people would go through the solution that you generate. Right? And the idea of these large language models is that you might be able to simulate create personas using these simulations. So I have to admit, I'm skeptical of personas in the first place, and then personas that are generated by AI, I think, amplify my skepticism. But the idea is that, normally you might want to get user feedback or get user input on something, but instead that we would use large language models in order to simulate that. Now, there's some advantages, obviously, because my students, for example, cannot travel to Uganda very easily, so if there's a way that they could get some additional information, there's some advantages of that, but there are also some risks. And I'd like to explain sort of a few of my thoughts about this process in a couple of sections of this talk. Okay, so the first thing that I want to emphasize that I think is incredibly important is that design is a transformational experience. Okay, and I'll start with just a small philosophical interlude. So how many of you have ever made anything in your life? And I'm hoping to see more hands than how many people have done human-centered design. I think probably everyone has made something. And how do you feel when that thing actually works? We feel happy, we feel great, we feel proud of ourselves, right? Even if it's something as small as putting together an IKEA bookcase, right? If you actually make it through to the end of the instructions and you can put books on that case, all of a sudden you feel like you can conquer the world, right? So this idea of the process of design being as important as the product of design is something that I think is fundamentally true about design and problem solving. It's always ironic. I come from MIT, and it's always the technology that fails during my talks. Okay. So this is a way that we can look at the different needs that human beings have in order to live a happy and fulfilled life, and it's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Many of you may have seen this before. And it talks about these sort of basic level needs that we need to survive, things like food and water and shelter. But then it talks about things that we have to have a psychologically rich life, like relationships and friendships and self-esteem, and then also to live a fulfilled life where we believe that we can shape our future and sort of fulfill our potential. So these are things that have been identified as what we need to have a full and rich life. And I believe that if you use a design lens, that using technology meets our basic needs, right? A water filter provides safe drinking water. A variety of grain mills, et cetera, provide food that we can eat. Houses provide us with shelter. However, those higher level needs, I believe, are met by designing technology. So we work together in design teams, so we develop relationships with not only our teammates, but also the users that we're designing for. Right? We've all said that when we design something, we feel great, we feel happy, we feel proud of ourselves. So these are aspects of the design process where the product of design certainly is important. It meets some of our basic needs. However, the process of design is critically important for these higher level needs. And when you're looking for having impact in a community, you want to make sure that you are not just meeting basic needs, but you're satisfying these other needs, these intangible benefits of the design process. So I often think that you can characterize design as not only design for development, but also design as development. And if we look at this within the context of academia, we can think about design as, first of all, our students or ourselves will create products, right? Or the community may create products. And that influences what we do. But then there's the process of design, right? And that influences how we feel. And then the pedagogy of design. That influences the way that we think. Design is an iterative process, and in so doing, you develop resilience, you develop the capacity to learn from things that don't work well and improve upon those. So design is really important in creating a lot of different skills, both tangible and intangible. So this is a picture of a student trip that I led to Botswana in 2017. And I love this picture because it represents the impacts of design in many ways. Our students were working on a deep sand wheelchair for use in a small community in the middle of the Kalahari Desert in Botswana. And in the front here with the green shorts and the MIT sweatshirt, that's Jefta. And he was struck down by an illness. They never really figured out what it was, but at the age of about 12 or 13, he could no longer walk. And he was confined to his house until the moment when our students and collaborators created this deep sand wheelchair. And this is actually a picture from the first time that Jefta ever went to the shop to buy himself a soda. And it was 2 kilometers away, and the whole team made it there. So here's an example of a product having a life-changing impact. Now, on this side of the screen, you see the 2 students from my design class. And the process by which they, first of all, learned about the context, but also about the capabilities of the local population to contribute design, was an integral part of their education, as well as the opportunity to apply their mechanical engineering skills and to see those skills have impact in the very near term. But the 4th person who had significant impact from this process is in the back, and that's Kemenau. And Kemenau was a bicycle mechanic, and he was part of this design team because he was really good at making things and working out the mechanical details of the design in collaboration with the students. And for Kemenau, going through this process actually made him realize that he could do something different with his life than just repairing bikes by the side of the road. And he actually started a business in which he is repairing and building wheelchairs in his own business. So you see this sort of transformation that happened on multiple levels by the users, by the students, and by the local designers. And I feel like that aspect of transformation is incredibly powerful. We also had a project in South Sudan where we worked on teaching the design process to some of the users within the community, and we did an evaluation afterwards, and I think there's a collection of quotes that I'd like to share that again speak to the transformational impact of the product, the process, and the pedagogy. So this first quote here is from one of the participants who said that they were proud of the technology they made, and since I made that technology, I have not slept hungry for days now. So South Sudan is a war-torn country with a lot of challenges, and this product clearly had an impact on this person's life. The next quote here is from Monica, who's the young woman at the front of this slide, and she said, "I felt happy and proud of myself for having developed a wheel cart. Some of my friends asked me where I got it from, and I told them that my team and I developed it, and they were shocked and proud of the great work." Right? So not only did it change the way she saw herself, but it also changed the way that the community saw her. Right? And so there's that type of transformation both internally and externally. Okay. And then this is an example of sort of this deep transformation. And by way of background, a lot of the conflict in South Sudan comes from cattle raiding, where people will steal cattle from a neighboring tribe, and that gives rise to escalated conflict. So one of the young men from the training said, "I was expecting the training to change me from being bad to good. Like I said before, that I was a raider, but now I am a scientist with technologies that have not been there before." So I think this really, again, speaks to the transformational process of design and being part of the design process. And so I worry when we start, instead of engaging the users in the design process, we engage simulations of users in the design process. And in fact, in another project that we're working on, this is in refugee camps in northern Uganda, we asked people what were the most important things that they learned during the design training that they went to. And in that design training, they learn the design process, and then they choose a project that they will work on, and then they create a prototype that they can then use. So if you look at the top 3 things, the first and most important was that they got to work as part of a team. So this idea of relationship as being part of the design process. Secondly, they said, I got to identify the problem to be solved. So this sense of agency that comes across by being involved in the design process. And next, I learned skills during the design training, right? So this idea of capacity building that happens as a result of the design process. Close behind in 4th place was that the project was earning money for me, right? But those other 3 things were more important than the income generated by these technologies. And I find that, again, to be very telling. And even things like labor savings devices, that was the least mentioned as one of the top 3 things. And so I find that remarkable. And a lot of times, when we're designing things externally, these benefits do not come to the users, to the beneficiaries of the project. So I think it's really important, whether we're talking about refugees in northern Uganda, or whether we're talking about, kids at an elementary school that our students are designing science experiments for, or if we're talking about public service projects to work with a local shelter, or whether we're talking about developing a commercial product, the way that the user is engaged in the design process is important. Okay. Which comes to my next point, which is that participation in the design process is really key to the transformation. And I've been talking a lot about design, and I wanted to just take a moment to share with you the way we think about design at D-Lab, and we characterize it in 3 ways. Okay. So I asked earlier if people had heard of human-centered design, or as it's often called, user-centered design. And that's a paradigm where the designers interview and work with the users in order to gain a lot of information from them, so that, again, they can put them at the center of the design solution. Co-creation or co-design is when the users and the designers are on the same team, so they're working together in order to create a solution. And then finally, user-generated design, or the program that we have at D-Lab that falls into that category, is called creative capacity building. And that's where you train the users to become designers. So you'll see the blend of the blue and the yellow to make green, which are the user designers. Another way of looking at that is that we could think about that in terms of design for the users, design with the users, or design by the users. So now I'll just step back to human-centered design, because in actual fact, I don't really do user-centered design. You'll notice I didn't raise my hand at that time. It's a methodology that was brought into popularity by this design firm called IDEO, and very much from the 1990s onward, it gained a lot in popularity and expanded out to this idea of design thinking, which people bring into a lot of different disciplines. And in many cases, you'll hear people hold it up as the gold standard of design. Okay. Well, I'm an engineer, and gold is not the greatest material, right? I mean, it's expensive, and it doesn't provide a very good foundation. So I think the challenges with human-centered design, it was created by a design firm which charges people to design things for them. So it's a good methodology in that context, but they're not trying to empower the end users. They're not looking for that type of transformation. So one of the things that I'm looking for is the titanium standard of design. And I like to believe that that's when the users have a greater range of participation, not just providing feedback and input, but also being engaged in decision-making and directing the project. So my colleague and I developed a framework to look at participation so that people can assess the type of participation that's happening in a project. Right. And again, we look at these ideas of information and sharing of opinions versus making decisions versus directing. And we characterized it in three broad buckets, the first being consultation, the second being partnership, and the third being leadership. And within that, within the context of consultation, we look at three different ways. The first is input, where it's pretty much a one-way flow of information and the users can just sort of say, share their opinion and that's it. The second would be interaction, where it's more of a two-way flow of information and there is a bit of a conversation that happens. And then the third is an iterative example of that, where the designers would go back to the users multiple times and each time use the feedback that they get from the users to respond and then bring the new solution back for feedback. So that's the consultation mode, and human-centered design is pretty much in the third of those, the iterative consultation. And this is something what a human-centered, what a consultative thing might look like, something like a series of interviews or a focus group, etc. The next mode is something we could refer to as partnership, and in that case, we would be looking at a collaborative or co-creative effort. And that's where, again, the users and the designers are working together on the team. And the way that we differentiate these two is that in collaboration, people are really pretty much sticking to their roles. So the engineer is doing the engineering work, the social scientist is doing the social science work, etc. As opposed to in co-creation, everyone is contributing with their full life experience. And this is an example of what co-creation might look like, where this is from a design summit where we had participants from 25 different countries working together on different projects. And then finally, leadership. And that's where the users take control of the design project and the direction that it takes. And in the one case, we have the empowerment, where the designers are helping with the users through the design process, but ultimately they're not making decisions and they're not directing the process. And then ownership, and that's where the users have complete direction and decision-making authority over the project. And this is something that where this might look like. Okay, so we have this idea of design being a transformative experience, and that the levels of participation are key to that transformational experience. And so now we get to the more challenging question, which is, how does AI help or hinder that transformational nature of design? Okay. And at this point, I'm not going to answer this question. I'm going to ask you to answer this question. So if I could ask you in the next, we have about 5 minutes or so, if you can find a partner who you don't know very well, don't travel far, but just try to find someone who you don't already know, introduce yourselves, and then discuss the following during the 5 minutes of this activity. So the first thing would just be, what are 3 words that describe how you feel about AI? And then the second would be, I'd like you to have a conversation about how you think AI might help or hinder the transformative nature of design. Okay. So the first one is just sort of a little icebreaker about where you stand on AI. And then secondly, I'd ask you to have a conversation about the second question for about the 3 or 4 minutes that remain. Okay? Great. So again, we have about 5 minutes for this. And I will shout loudly into my microphone when the time is up, because I imagine it will get a little bit loud. But if you could just sort of stand up, mill around, find someone who you don't know, introduce yourselves, share your 3 words, and then discuss how you think design helps or hinders the transformation of design. All right, let's go to it. Okay, if we can start to wrap up. Okay, hello. Raise your hands if you can hear me. Great. Okay, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Excellent. It's never wasted to spend time as a middle school teacher. That's what I've learned in life. Okay, so I hope you had some interesting thoughts to share, and there's certainly plenty of time to follow up. I thought I would share with a few thoughts of my own just to close things up. First of all, my 3 words about AI is, first of all, somewhat worried, somewhat skeptical, and sometimes even fearful. But we'll see how things turn out in the end. So some of the things that I think are important is, first of all, it matters who or what is creative. And I think, Ed, you talked about that, right? Where this idea of making sure that AI isn't taking on the creative roles, but rather the supportive roles. And that's critically important in terms of the transformation and the intangible benefits that people get from the design process. Secondly, there it is. It's important to think about who gains those intangible benefits. And as educators, it's important for us because we're almost always thinking about student outcomes, right? And it's really important that our students gain these intangible benefits. But if you're doing work in a community or at a field site, it's also important that those people get these benefits. And so you might think about, how can we make sure that these benefits are spread as widely as we can? Okay. So the other thing is that it's necessary to understand the full range of options for participation in order to achieve effective long-term development. And one of the things that we found is that when we do this type of workshop with humanitarian workers, they had never even thought about some of these deeper levels of participation. You know, as one person said, well, we have a hotline, and they considered that to be participation, but there can be a lot more than that. So really understanding the full spectrum of participation is an important thing. And using AI to replace human interactions has a significant impact on the level of participation. And so when considering how AI might be used in the design process, you have to be very cognizant of whether or not it's replacing human interactions or whether it's augmenting them. Okay, finally. And then human-centered design is especially susceptible because it has limited participation. In human-centered design, most of the decision-making is happening by the design team, not by the users. And so if you do more and more to replace the users out of that dynamic, then you're getting even less participation. So I did want to close with a couple of quotes. So one is came from a recent evaluation of the program that we're doing in East Africa, where we've trained more than 2,500 refugees and host community members in the design process, where they're creating technologies that can improve their lives. But beyond that, what they say is that the participants expressed that the program gave them a renewed sense of hope and the confidence to envision a better future. Right? They described that they could set clear goals, such as finishing school, starting businesses, and planning pathways for education or other careers or ventures. And then finally, that this reflected a shift where it expanded their aspirations and encouraged them to see innovation and design as part of their long-term development, that these are life skills that they will continue to use. So the idea that, you know, it is more than just the product of design. I think I've emphasized that enough, but if you need to hear it a few more times, come and talk to me during break. And then this is a quote, sort of bringing it back to AI, from a recent article that came out of MIT, which is called Your Brain on ChatGPT. And it looked at brain activity that happens when you do a task using ChatGPT or not using it. And it's a really interesting article, and you could go there if you were interested. And what they say is, while these tools offer, you know, amazing opportunities for enhanced learning and information access, it has an impact on cognitive development, critical thinking, and intellectual independence. So it demands very careful consideration and continued research. So here we are at the end of the opening of ICERI 2025, and I encourage you to continue these conversations, to be inspired by each other, but also to be critical and also to be constructive. And so with that, I say thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so let me finish. We are a little bit behind schedule. We'll have some